Welcome to the KBB Review podcast. My name is Andy Davies and this is episode 3 of season 14. And today we're looking at something which actually asks a very difficult existential question of independent KBB retailers. Do you ever think what might happen if you get into financial difficulty and you just couldn't finish your clients' outstanding projects? In particular, we're looking at whether or not retailers should have some kind of deposit protection insurance. In other words, something that means clients will get back any money they've already given you if the worst happens. So what is deposit protection insurance and how does it work? What are the pros and cons? Why is it not more prevalent? How do you talk about it with customers without sounding like you're about to go bust? And given the sums of money involved, should it actually be mandatory? We're talking it through with Richard Hibbert from KSL in Sudbury. He's also the chairman of the KBSA, of course, and Nick Warrington from Stuart J. Warrington in Macclesfield. But first, the KBB Review podcast has been bringing you analysis, debate, interviews, and much, much more for well over 250 episodes. So if you've enjoyed it, it would be great if you could recommend it to your colleagues and any other KBB industry people you know. Simply tell them to search KBB Review, all one word, wherever they get their podcasts, and they'll find us. The bigger our audience, the more we can do. So pass it on. So here are our guests for today, as promised. First up, we have Richard Hibbert from KSL in Sudbury. Hello to you.
Hello.
Hello, and we have Nick Warrington from Stuart J. Warrington in Macclesfield. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Andrew.
At some point, Nick, you know I'm going to call you Stuart.
That's fine. Everybody else does as well.
If I do that, just correct me. All right. Okay, so look, let's do the usual introductions. I'm sure most people know this, Rich, but can you give us the quick overview of KSL, where you are and what you do?
Yeah, KSL is an independent kitchen, bedroom, bathroom and outdoor kitchen showroom in Sudbury and Suffolk, and I also chair the KBSA.
Yes, you do. And Nick, give us the Stuart J. Warrington headlines.
Stuart J. Warrington & Co. are based in Macclesfield. We've been serving customers here for over 40 years now. We provide high-quality fitted kitchens and we also operate an independent plumbers merchants.
Fantastic. So we're going to talk about deposit protection today. And I'm going to start with you, Rich, because it's a big part of the KBSA offering. So you're probably the best guy to just do the definitions. What is deposit protection as we understand it? How does it work?
Well, in terms of deposit protection that we sort of offer in the main, it is what it says, it's protecting the deposit, but our one generally goes a step further because it includes more than just a deposit. It's up to 50% of the whole contract, and it also includes work in progress, things like that. So, I mean, I look at it a bit like the ATOL for the holiday industry, that sort of ATOL get you home if the company goes out of business or the flight's cancelled, whatever it is. And it works similarly if you've got a kitchen in progress, then the insurers step in and get that finished. And the people on the scheme are vetted anyway, so they tend to be stronger people. But yeah, deposit protection, kind of what it says on the tin, and there are a lot of schemes out there that just cover the deposit. Our one covers a little bit more. So
it's effectively an insurance policy that gives reassurance to the client that the big sum of money they're handed over as a deposit will get back if the retailer goes pop.
Yeah, and it covers whatever way you pay. So it doesn't just cover the credit card side of it. It covers if you pay by backs or cash or however it is, it gets logged. And it has changed over the years. So, I mean, the KBSA used to have like a bond. They used to have a pot of money to cover any issues. And it became insurance back quite a while ago. And so now, yeah, it's all covered by our insurers who back it up.
All right, so that's the basic overview of what it is. Obviously, Rich, I'm assuming you have it. So, Nick, do you have any kind of deposit protection at all?
No.
We're into the pros and cons then here, aren't we? So let's start with the cons, because clearly you don't have it. What's your view of it and why don't you have it?
I probably come from the position that I'm not completely anti-deposit protection, and I am, hold my hands up, I am a member of the KBSA, but I choose not to enter into the deposit protection scheme, and there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One is that, as I understand it, it's obviously an all or nothing option. So if you want to do deposit protection, you have to protect and pay the premiums against everybody's deposits. So there's a cost associated with that. We've been in business for 40 years. We've never needed, or none of our customers have ever needed to call upon deposit protection. So from that perspective, why put an additional cost on the price of their kitchen for protection, which I believe they don't need? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in terms of the payment structure, I've changed the payment structure that we have here. When I took over the business from my dad 11 years ago, he'd operated for almost 30 years with taking no deposit whatsoever and just took payment in full on completion. I've adjusted that. I take 50% as soon as the order is placed, and I don't do anything until I've received that first 50%. I then take another 35% a week before we start on site, and the final 15% on completion of the project. And that is there to protect our cash flow. And I've had very little pushback from consumers in working on that structure. But then I do have the benefit of 40 years of trading history behind us in the local area, which probably assists in people feeling like we're a trusted retailer that they can trust with their deposits.
I suppose, Rich, with your KBSA hat on, you have a sort of wider blanket view of the industry of raising standards and that kind of thing. But Nick's highlighted a very good point there, hasn't he? Which is you're dealing with, by the nature of it, lots of independent businesses, and they all do things in a very different way and have a very different structure of how they do it. So what's your argument when you're talking to people like Nick who think the idea is sound, but it's not right for him?
From a KSL head, I like it. I like the analogy with the atoll. Especially during the tough periods, it's even more useful because people get a little bit more wary when it's through tough periods. I mean, we've been going 35 years as well, so I don't think we need it, as in it's vital. But on the flip side, I hardly ever take any credit card payments. So I think it's about 40 quid for each customer for deposit protection. I'm offering them more than what the credit card provides. But also I'm saving myself. I mean, I looked at it before. Average was about 300 quid for the credit card charges. I'm saving that on every one for 40 quid essentially. So for me, it's a no-brainer that I give my customers more and save all the credit card fees, because 99.9 now pay by bank transfer, and they're covered on that with a KBSA, which they wouldn't be if they just paid on backs in a normal scenario. From the KBSA point of view, we always used to be mandatory, and that obviously was a barrier to entry for the KBSA because, like Nick says, he takes 50%. Well, on deposit protection, 25% is the maximum because it's a calculated risk. It's an insurable risk and things like that. Obviously, adding 50% on a deposit would make it very expensive. That doesn't mean you can't take other payments. We take a payment before we start, 7 days before, and things like that. But, you have to work through it. The KBSA changed because we're a trade association for our members, and I always say this, that each retailer is kind of like where they used to say a man's house is his castle. It's the same with the showroom. Like, Nick will do things differently to I do. Nick will sell different kitchens, he'll sell in a different way, he'll design differently. There's lots of things going on differently to our business, and the KBSA want to champion that. We already vet them, and if they're a Trustmark operator, they have to offer credit card as an option to pay to add a protection. That's mandatory with the Trustmark scheme that we operate through. So you've got different protections now, and we have to look after every retailer in the way they want to work. So that's why it's a change to not mandatory anymore. But I think it has a place and it's important, but it isn't for everyone. You get a choice, but from my point of view as KSL, it's cost saving and it adds extra protection, which I think's not a bad thing for consumers.
Can I just ask a question about the KBSA scheme? And part of this is probably my own ignorance, to be honest, because I think the 25% limit has probably been something that has put me off that scheme in the past. But as part of my prep for the pod, I did have a look over the protection scheme in a bit more detail. So as I understand it, although the consumer would only be protected for 25%, I would still be able to be in the scheme and actually take a payment up to 50% anyway. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a 25% deposit and then 50% prior to start, basically.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean members don't take more. It's only covering the 50%, but also it's got that on the Plus scheme, it's getting the project finished as well. So the insurers do take on and get the job finished.
So under the mechanics of the scheme and the terms that I just outlined, so I'm basic. By the time I start on site, I've got, well, in theory, It doesn't always happen. 85% in the bank. Would I technically still be able to offer the deposit protection, but subject to the fact that the consumer is only protected up to 25% of the contract value? Or would I tweak my terms to reflect the KBSA scheme?
Yeah, to be in it, you'd need to take a 25% deposit, but we still take more prior to installation. So we do 25, and then most members would take most of the money either on delivery or prior to delivery.
Ah, right, okay.
Still.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, there's lots of individual work throughs on it, and there's lots of things around the scheme where the insurers look at it and they can make tweaks individually. So what we say is it's best that each member talks to the insurers and just understands exactly what they're doing and what they can do, because there's lots of, like any insurance, there's lots of ways to make sure it works for you. And I think it is misunderstood. I think a lot of people misunderstand offering the insurance, and it's good to talk to the insurers directly just to find out, if you're doing regular above the normal contract value and you're taking different payments, it's worth talking to them, because they can normally find a way to make it work for you, for sure.
Can I just ask, Rich, because so much of this is about trust, isn't it? It's about reputation. Both of you have talked a lot about how long your businesses have been there, and you talk as if that underpins trust and reputation, obviously. Do you raise it with consumers, or do they raise it with you? Do they ever ask you about this because you have this reputation, or are you the one that brings it up in conversation? I would assume that you're the one who brings it up.
So I don't use it as a scare tactic or anything like that, because I don't want them to think, Willie might go out of business, So we always mention that we're KBSA members and what that means, that we're vetted and blah, blah, blah. And then we do talk about, as members, you also get the deposit protection and the plus scheme, which effectively is ATOL for the holiday industry. And that's as far as we generally go, because we know we're secure. We know we've been here 35 years and we're not using it as a sort of a way of also making us look like we're potentially in danger. And they think, actually, do I want to give 25% over? It's a lot of money. We don't want to create that. But we do have people ask us. I mean, we've had people credit check us, and mainly they're people that don't know you. So whether you've got 35 years or 1 year, people who don't know you and are finding you online and things like that still potentially have a worry. I mean, I think I would if I was paying deposits up to 25,000 and whatever it is. That's a lot of money that's going to someone, and you've only seen the design. And it depends on the time. There's loads of businesses gone out of business last year, and some big businesses and some businesses have been going a long time, turning over, making lots of profit, and then all of a sudden, bang, a few months, bad months, and they're gone. So there's all different types of people, and I think it allows us to cover those. But as I said before, also save money on the credit card charges.
I suppose that's true, though, Nick, is that the last thing you want to do is plant a seed in a consumer's mind that this might be an issue.
Yeah, I think so. And it's an interesting one in that in the ordinary course of things, I probably only have perhaps 1 in 20 jobs where people even raise a question about what happens to the money in the meantime, and how is that protected. Probably even fewer than that. But yes, if I was to say, and I have a deposit protection scheme, it's a difficult one to put into your sales pitch, I suppose. And I think Richard makes a very good point. If you make it feel as though it is part of a wider membership, then it's just there because that's a benefit of the fact that we are a member of the KBSA, rather than, I've gone out and got this deposit protection scheme protection for you because I think I might be going bust in the next 6 months. So I think a lot of it is down to the way that you do actually present it. Yeah,
and ATOL gives us a good opportunity, because ATOL, you wouldn't buy a holiday for a non-ATOL protected, and that's clearly on your invoice as well, and a charge and everything like that. So,
but they've done decades of marketing and conversations about ATOL, that there is that is a well-known system that you, as you quite rightly say, you would look for it if you went to a travel agent, for example, whereas that isn't the case in this industry at all.
No, and we use that. We use their big marketing, to be honest. It's, as a business, as a KSL, we use the fact that ATOL is so well known to sort of market that side, but it isn't a heavy push. It's just included in the everything.
There have been lots of big names that have gone pop, national names, big brands like MFI, but obviously it also happens to independent retailers as well. And there is a danger, I suppose, isn't there, that the reputation of the entire industry is sullied by the headlines of one that goes under. And there will be, as you say, people are protected with credit cards and that kind of thing, but there are people always left out of pocket. When you see the stories of people going bust, does it make you think differently about what your reputation is or how the reputation of the industry is seen?
I think it's difficult, and I think that whatever sector you are in, there are always bad players. I mean, I've had a bit of a varied career and I've worked in other areas and I've seen bad players in those as well. And the question then is whether you think there's enough of them that it tarnishes everybody's reputation. You can almost draw a little bit of a distinction because you have some people who go into administration and get themselves into financial difficulty, and there's no fraudulent intent, shall we say, in that occurrence happening. They've got there because they've got into cash flow difficulties. They're probably using deposits and advance payments within the cash flow of the business instead of setting it aside. I put mine to one side. It's not used in the day-to-day running in the business, so I don't spend it until I've had a bill relating to that job. But there's people who do that because at the end of the day, we are in an industry where, particularly I'm a small showroom. We don't do a massive amount of jobs a year. And so there are retailers where if you have a quiet month and you've got the overhead of a couple of designers, you've got a fitting team that's perhaps not running at full capacity, you've got the overheads of the showroom, all the other business overheads. Some people might dip into those deposits to cash flow that quiet month. And they're not doing that in a bad way. They're doing it, we've had a quiet month, we'll use that money, we'll pick up some extra orders next month, everything will be fine. And then they have another month like that and another month like that. And before they know it, they're beyond the point where they can get out of it. So you've got those types of insolvencies. But you've then, you have then got other people who are sitting behind a limited company, ring-fenced liability. They're taking big deposits and they've no intention of fulfilling those jobs. And they do a flit and they take a load of money and they pulled a load of money out of the business. There are differences there between those two. And I think the problem is at the moment that there are a number of the businesses that do fail, which fall into the sort of the former camp where it's purely down to the fortunes of the business, and people will question, well, you're still taking deposits, etc. But there's no intention there to not fulfil the order. They've just found themselves in a position where, because of lack of sales, they've got more money going out than coming in.
I think that's true. But there's plenty of cases where I've heard when this happens, and of course the consumer then, and we've written about it in the magazine, the consumer then is going, I can't believe I handed £30,000 over without asking any questions whatsoever about who this company was, what they were going to do with it, what was happening with that money. And it's this idea, yes, with the bigger multiples, I think it's a much bigger issue around they're literally taking deposits off people the day before they go into administration, which is clearly, morally wrong, but it is, legally okay. But it's with the smaller guys that, as you say, have got themselves into some trouble and they don't set out to defraud anybody or to con people out of money. But it's this idea, I suppose, that anyone could be a kitchen retailer tomorrow, set themselves up without any checks or balances and just take enormous sums of money off people as deposits without any real questions or checks. That's okay. I suppose the next question comes about whether or not it should be mandatory. It's more a question, I think, of whether the industry itself wants to set up a scheme that works for it, or whether they have a scheme thrust upon them because it becomes a political issue at some point, like it has with private rental, for example. So what do you think, Rich? Is there a cause for having some kind of mandatory scheme that most retailers attach themselves to protect the industry as a whole and to stop outside forces forcing mandatoriness on you?
It's a difficult one. I mean, to a degree, I agree. And on the flip side, I looked lately in my local area and seeing he's opened a restaurant, he's opened a cafe, he's got a coffee shop, he's got a garden business, he's got this, that and the other. And I think, God, you've got no experience in that. And they quickly realise it's more difficult than they think, and often they go. And and probably more than kitchen businesses. With my KBSA hat on, the members that we have to have a showroom. So there's a big commitment from our members that they've got to take on installation, they've got to take on design, they've got to have a showroom. They get financially vetted, and they get vetted through their consumers at the start and things like that. And they get some ongoing vetting. Trust mark vetting is another process. So we find that our members generally are quite static. Not to say they can't go, because there are factors that just beyond their control takes them out. And we try to protect them from that with our legal helplines and things like that. I find that the independents we deal with are very good retailers, and it's very, very unusual for them to go and they're not fly-by-night people, because they just wouldn't join the KBSA. But I think it's a wider issue with companies going into administration. We've been taken with people in the past, builders with no staff, no showroom, their office is their home or a dedicated office. You hear it all the time with builders. You don't necessarily hear it all the time with kitchen retailers and things like that. I think kitchens particularly have come a long way, but I think the fact that they're bundled in with construction still hampers them. But I think it's really hard to say something, you need something, but not necessarily that. But I think at the moment, the way the KBSA vets them, I think looking from the KBSA member point of view, they're quite secure, and forcing a mandatory wouldn't necessarily be the right thing. But I think in general, this limited company and the way things work needs addressing a little bit more. And that's big and small businesses.
You see, it's interesting as well. If you think about, for example, the KBSA, and the KBSA does great things, and I'm a member, and I'm proud to be a member of the KBSA for all of the reasons that Richard has said. I think part of the problem is, if you perhaps looked at who the bad players are and where the risk lies, it's probably not with a KBSA member. It's with other corners of the market, shall we say. And so, for instance, if you go down a mandatory scheme, how does that work? If a new showroom pops up down the road from me tomorrow, they're not going to be able to get, for example, a KBSA membership without any trading history. So what's the mechanism, for example, for them to be able to provide a deposit protection scheme? How does that work? And so I think if there is an argument that you have stronger regulation for this sort of thing, it's how that scheme is administered and how is membership to that scheme provided, because the likes of the KBSA wouldn't have them as members on the.
But I suppose the question is,
system.
Nick, is that isn't it up to the industry to decide what that mechanism is, and therefore one that works for everybody, rather than having some outside body suddenly decide that it's not right that people can take £20,000 worth of deposit and potentially lose it, and therefore you have no say in what that scheme is. That's because that's what's happened to the property rental sector. They've just had a scheme thrust upon them, and that's the danger. And there's no answer to it, obviously, but it is such an interesting debate about protecting the consumer and protecting clients, because this is an industry built on trust and reputation.
I agree. I think what, for instance, the ATOL does, for example, in KBSA is as well, there's a lot to be said for consumers. I don't want to use the word, well, I am going to use the word, taking a little bit of personal responsibility for who they give their money to, because there is a lot of truth in the fact that both Richard and I are talking about the fact that we've been trading for so many years. KBSA talks about who their members are. Yet, as you say, anyone can set up as a KBB business and be taking vast deposits from people. And there has to be a certain element of personal responsibility where you as an individual take a decision to hand over that money. And sometimes people do that with very little thought as to who they're actually giving that money to. I mean, I can probably think of 2 or 3 businesses in this area alone where kitchen businesses have popped up, taken money, and then disappeared in quite alarming circumstances, shall we say, with quite a lot of outstanding deposit, in a way where they're not really giving any explanation as to why they've gone with a load of money. And that's the problem, is getting to the point where the small crop-ups perhaps have got a bit more regulation, or consumers are applying a bit more thought to, is this the sort of business that I should be handing this sort of money over to?
Yes, but then that goes against the trust reputation of independent businesses thing, doesn't it? If your argument is, look, we've been in business for 40 years, well, I'm sure there's plenty of businesses that have been in there for 40 years that have got themselves into trouble as well.
Yeah.
So it's just a really difficult, it's a slightly uncomfortable conversation, should we say, because as you say, I think the vast majority of independent businesses don't set out to do this. They just find themselves in this situation. And given the way the market is at the moment, for example, it can happen to anybody.
It can, yeah.
And you've got the other side of it as well, because the biggest thing with an independent is as soon as we take a deposit, we action a load of stuff. So we generally order a big kitchen where it's bespoke to that customer. Even if it's not bespoke sizing, it's still exactly the carcass colour, exactly the door finish, the door colour, the door style, the handle, the drillings, the this, that and the other is exactly for that client. And as soon as we order it and confirm it, we're in for that cost. And I've had someone in the past decide they don't want the kitchen anymore. And, I've had to try and sell that on separately for different reasons. So there's a protection both ways, because to be honest, the consumer's got so much protection these days that we also need to protect ourselves. And so it is difficult. Consumers are well versed on things. They're well protected. And there needs to be sort of a protection both ways. So it's a difficult one. Escrow won't work because cash flow will be killed for retailers. And a lot of retailers have to pay pro forma up front for things now. And so, it is a very difficult situation. And there's risk on both sides for sure.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think you've made this point before, Nick. Consumers sometimes will look for any reason to withhold their money until their demands are met, even if those demands are a little bit, unreasonable.
Yeah, the reason I have the payment structure I do is for exactly the reason that Richard's just described, is the fact that as soon as I order cabinetry and doors, I am well and truly committed to paying out significant sums of money, and that payment from the consumer covers that risk. And then, we leave that 15% in at the end. And I mean, we've had experiences in the past where we've had customers saying, well, I expected this kitchen to be this way, and there's nothing in the showroom that corresponds with this expectation. It's an expectation that's never been delivered to us prior to contract. And the conversation usually goes, if you'd asked me to do that, I would have either told you I cannot do it, or here is how much extra I would have charged to provide the service in that way. But all the time, there is still an outstanding payment there whilst you're looking to resolve the situation. And, that's one of the reasons that I take the amounts that I do, because I'd rather be arguing about 15% at the end of the job than 50% or 75%.
Yeah, as Richard quite rightly says, there needs to be protection both ways here, that everybody comes out of it no further out of pocket. But look, as always with these things, it's a massive subject, but it's been so interesting just to scratch the surface of it with you guys. So Nick, Rich, thanks for your time, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.